Hi,
Hi, Arjun. Great to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm absolutely fantastic. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited to dive into our conversation today. Let's start by exploring your experience with GitHub Copilot. Can you share how you've incorporated it into your workflow as a staff engineer?
Sure. So GitHub Copilot is one of the coding agents that I use on a day-to-day basis, and primarily like what I use is both the planning mode and the the planning and the agent mode. So the way I usually go about using this on a day-to-day basis is, given let's say I have a ticket or task that I need to work on, I would pass it the description of the ticket, and I would say that, let's say, this is what I want to work on. Once I pull up the relevant code and pull up Copilot on that, after that, what I do is, like, I set it to plan mode for it to figure out what all details are needed, and I review the plan what it comes up with before it makes any edits. Once it's done with that, if there's any other supporting repositories that are needed, like let's say there are other dependencies based on which the plan could make some tweaks, I mentioned that, like, refer these repositories as a reference, and based on that, update the plan. Once that gets done, I switch over to the whole the agent mode, in which I've added whitelists for, like, some commands that it's allowed to run, and some commands it's not allowed to run. So anything that's destructive, like, rmrf and kubectl delete or kubectl edit, any of these destructive commands are in the blacklist. Like, these are not allowed to be run by default. But in the basic CRUD operations, like, I allow it to create, I allow it to read, but no overwrite or update or delete is something that I allow by default. So once that, with these blacklists and whitelists in place, I enable the agent mode to, go ahead and start implementing the request that I had initially. Once that gets done, I review the code, like, I run it, I check whether it's working as expected, see if it's, I keep my eye out to make sure that's not going haywire or, completely off track from what I initially wanted. And once it's done with an initial draft, I review the code, go through what it's done. If there's some absolutely unnecessary pieces of code that's it's edited for the whole task, I just ask it. Or I revert it myself if it's not too many changes. And that's usually how I use Copilot in my day-to-day workflow.
That's a thorough and thoughtful approach to using GitHub Copilot, Arjun. It sounds like you've implemented a robust system to leverage its capabilities while maintaining control and oversight. I'm curious, given your experience, have you encountered any challenges or surprising outcomes when using Copilot, especially considering the careful guardrails you've set?
Yes, definitely. So there's been multiple times where, let's say, I mentioned that, okay, this fix that you gave does not work, or like there's some error or something like that happens. Oftentimes it's gone through the whole, like, it just decides to delete the whole deployment. If, let's say, there was an issue with the deployment, it just, the first suggestion it gives is, let's just delete this deployment. And there's absolutely no need to do that. You can just take a look at the logs, describe the containers, and see what's going wrong. But no, there have been times where delete was the first suggestion. So that's where this whole guardrails and everything is something that I've had felt the need to do. Yeah, that's primarily the biggest one and the most concerning one that I've come across till date.
That's a very insightful point. It highlights the importance of having those guardrails in place. Your approach of whitelisting and blacklisting commands seems to be a solid strategy to prevent such drastic measures from being implemented unnecessarily. Given this, how do you typically manage Copilot's suggestions, especially when it comes to complex tasks or dependencies across multiple repositories? Do you find yourself often intervening, or has it become more reliable over time?
Okay, really good question. And yeah, I think you kind of answered it in your own question itself. So to be honest, like, initially in the, when it's just came out, it was definitely not reliable, and I had to intervene more often. I couldn't just remotely leave agent mode enabled at all. But off late, like, I don't know what are the changes that have come in. Is it just the fact that I'm using Claude 4.5? Is that the model that's come in, or the way it's retrieving relevant information, or the fact that it has access to other repositories based on which it can figure out the dependencies and stuff like that? So all of these, like, overtime developments that have come in, is, I would say, has improved the whole experience so much so that it's becoming more and more hands off. As much as yeah, it's fairly becoming more and more hands off over time. When it comes to multi-repository situations, like, let's say I have multiple microservices running across that have dependencies on each other. So what I usually do is I'll create one repository that has, like, submodules, Git submodules, in which, let's say, I clone in the backend, the front end. Let's say there's an ML model, then I would put that as well as one of the submodules. And what I would do is, at the root of this primary repo with the submodules, I would keep a Docker Compose file that is responsible for pulling up all of these containers in, let's say, a debug or reload mode or something like that. And this primary repository is what I would open in Copilot, I mean, in VS Code, basically, so that it has a bird's eye view for the whole system of what's in here, basically. Not just that, I would make sure that there is the GitHub Copilot instructions that is updated for this repository. And to include with that, there's also always, pretty much every repository that I work on has docs folder, in which we have, like, a high level overview of how this whole code works, what it's meant to do, what are its responsibilities, where its scope of responsibilities end, all of this, and also the architecture as well. So the architecture is something that has made the biggest difference in documentation wise. So what I end up doing is, within Markdown, I use Mermaid.js to show the high level architecture and, like, how each component interacts with each other. And in this parent repository, which has all the submodules, that also shows the connections between these modules. So a combination of Copilot instructions that is auto generated, and, like, manually generated Markdown documentation, basically, in the docs folder of each repo. These are some of the things that has helped, my agent stay grounded and, like, stick to the original goal of what I'm trying to do. So those are some of the strategies that I've used to, what do you say, work across multiple repositories and not just limit changes to, let's say, backend only. And then I don't really have to go and apply changes to backend first and then front end for second. And it all just gets applied in one shot. And for the most part, it does work in one shot prompt as well. But yeah, it's subjective to the task that I have at hand and how complex it is. Multiple varying factors on that.
Your approach is both systematic and strategic, Arjun. It's impressive how you've structured your repositories and documentation to provide context and guidance for GitHub Copilot. Your use of a central repository with submodules, along with clear documentation and architecture diagrams, seems to create a cohesive environment for Copilot to operate effectively across services. How do you see GitHub Copilot evolving in the future, especially in relation to your workflow? Are there features or capabilities you hope to see that would enhance its integration into your development process?
So, really good question. In fact, like, one of the things that I've used and I've in the past is the MCP integration. In fact, has been quite useful when it comes to giving it a task. So, for example, if, let's say, I have a GitHub issue that has a very well defined outline of what needs to be done, it's I don't need to really send in the actual description from the instructions, or sorry, description from the ticket to the chat. I can do something as simple as go fix issue number 12, and as long as my GitHub is connected, my MCP server is running, it's more than capable of going and pulling all the details from that ticket, and, like, reading through the documentation, reading through the Copilot instructions, and seeing what needs to be done through the whole thing, and go through an implementation of the fix. And so this is one of the places where I've found like integrations to come in quite handy. Not just that, I've also used Jira integrations as well to some extent, in which I would just mention like a link, or let's say a ticket number or something like that, and similar flow, like go and take a look at this ticket and try to implement a fix. So once that gets done, it goes through an initial pass, and then I would review through the code. Like, I mean, for the most part, in at this point where it's gotten to is like, I tell it, go look at a ticket, try to implement a fix, and I take a break from my desk, or let's say go to a meeting, come back, and I have the first draft ready, which I can review and see how it works. And once that's done, I run it, check through the code if it makes sense, and then run all the tests and everything as expected by the repository. Then I commit the changes and send it off to a code review. Once it's sent off to a code review, in fact, like if there is feedback that comes in from my teammates or something, like minor edits, like let's do it this way instead of the other way around. Again, I tag Copilot, like, can you raise a PR for this? And for the most part, like these changes are so small that I don't really need to make changes to it. But of course, there are some times that I need to edit it. And almost 90% of my work is very much automated, even with the Copilot on web as well. So yeah, that's how I'm working through all the integrations and everything that's available here.
It's fascinating to see how you've integrated GitHub Copilot into your development process, especially with the use of MCP and Jira integrations. It sounds like you're leveraging automation and integration to streamline your workflow significantly. Looking ahead, are there any specific improvements or new features you'd like to see in GitHub Copilot or its integrations? Perhaps something that could make it even more intuitive or efficient for your use cases?
Gonna hold off on that. Very little time.